A rider came for her at sundown, not to ask, to demand. Adela Vickers was at her cook fire when the young man appeared at the edge of the tree line, his horse blowing hard, his face tight with something between desperation and reluctance. He was Lakota, not more than 17, and he spoke 3 words she recognized: Chaitin horse, bad, before switching to sign that she could follow well enough. A man crushed, a leg, 1 full day trapped, come now. She did not hesitate. She had been living at the edge of the Painted Rock territory for 3 years, long enough to know the name Chaitin, the chief's eldest son, a man of 28 who led the Eastern Huntston hunting parties, and whom she had seen once at a trading parley, composed and watchful, a head taller than the men beside him. She had not spoken to him. She had not been invited to. The camp did not want her there. She knew that. She had spent 3 years being tolerated at a distance by the Lakota bands near Painted Rock, tolerated in the way the frontier tolerates anything it can't quite remove, with weary sidelong looks and no open welcome. Her predecessor at Painted Rock, a man named Howell who had called himself a doctor and carried laudanum and a saw, had done harm she was still paying for. She had sutured 2 of his mistakes and eased one woman's lost hours after his well-intended intervention had gone wrong, and the camp remembered Howell whenever they looked at her. But the boy had come. That meant someone had sent him, which meant Chaitin's need had overridden whatever reluctance was in the camp, and need had its own authority. She packed her case in 4 minutes, bone-set tools, clean linen, the medicines she trusted, her sharpest knife, a length of green-cut willow for splinting, the tincture she made herself from willow bark that she had learned from her grandmother, and which she would put against any laudanum in the territory. She saddled her mule, who was steady and unimpressed by crisis, and she followed the boy into the dark. They rode 1.5 hours into the dark, through red clay flats and cottonwood breaks she knew well enough to trust by starlight. She spent the ride going over what she knew of crush injuries, a full day pinned. The possibilities were grim, and she did not soften them, because softening would not help him. The camp was in a river bend, and she heard it before she saw it, the collective tension of people gathered around a crisis. Fires burned high. Too many people were awake. The horse had been moved. She was glad of that, because a horse that size, dead or alive, could have been impossible to work around. What remained was Chaitin on the ground, and 2 women beside him, and 4 men standing at a distance who did not want to be there and were there anyway, and a stillness over the whole of it that she had learned to recognize as the stillness of a situation that could go several ways. She dismounted and brought her case and walked forward, and one of the 4 men stepped in front of her. He was perhaps 50, heavyset and unyielding, and she recognized him. 3 Fires, the chief's second man, who had been at the trading parley and had watched her the whole time with the expression of a man making a calculation he had not finished. She stopped. She did not try to push past. Pushing past was the wrong move, and she knew it. "Let me see him," she said. She said it in the little Lakota she had been learning since she arrived, slowly and imperfectly, and then repeated in English, looking at 3 Fires. He looked at her for a long moment. Behind his eyes she could see the argument happening, the part of him that trusted no settler healer, and the part of him that had seen a man fail to come back from this kind of injury before. Chaitin was the chief's son. That was the weight pressing against the reluctance. Then he stepped aside. What she saw when she knelt beside Chaitin stopped her breath for a count of 3. He was conscious, which was itself a remarkable thing. The horse had fallen on his left leg. She could see the story of it in the crushed ground, the gouge where the animal had gone down and rolled, and he had been pinned from the mid-thigh down for a full day before they found him and moved the horse. His face was grey-white with pain and exhaustion, and his eyes, when they opened at the sound of her approach, were dark and direct and showed a terrible held-in quality, the look of a man who has been controlling himself for 20 hours and has very little left. She did not speak. She opened her case and began her examination with careful hands. The leg was the thing that mattered most, and the thing that frightened her most. The thigh had a fracture. She could feel it through careful pressure, and the involuntary sound he made when her hands found it told her it was significant. Below the knee the situation was worse. The fibula had snapped clean, and the swelling was severe, the skin stretched and dark with bruising from the knee down. She had seen worse in her 12 years of midwifery and bone setting. She had also lost patience with less. What she could not yet tell was whether the long compression had taken the blood flow. That was the question that would determine everything. She pressed her thumb firmly to the top of his foot and watched for color return, counting in her head. 1, 3, 4. Color came back, slow, but it came. She sat back on her heels and looked at 3 fires. "The leg can be saved," she said, "if I work now, tonight, without waiting. If I wait until morning, it cannot be saved. The bone must be set, and the leg must be elevated, and the circulation must be managed from this hour forward." She looked at him steadily. "Tell me what you want to do." 3 fires looked at her. He looked at Chaitan. He spoke in Lakota, too fast for her to follow most of it, and one of the women beside Chaitan, the older one, her face carved with grief and control, spoke back. Adela understood 2 words, her name and the word for waiting, which was also the word for not yet. She waited. She kept her hands still on her knees, because this was not her moment to push. This was her moment to be still and let them decide. She had learned that much in 3 years. The woman looked at her. She was perhaps 50, with a face that had known hard things and not been broken by them. She was, Adela would later learn, Chaitan's mother, a woman named Wakshat Wai, which meant sacred woman, and who had earned the name through 40 years of being the steadying center of her family and her people. Wakshat, we spoke 1 word. 3 fires stepped back. Adela opened her case and got to work. What followed was the hardest 3 hours of her professional life. Setting a femur fracture on a man of Chaitan's size, he was long-limbed and powerfully built, even wasted as he was by pain and a full day without water, in firelight, on the ground, with an audience of 30 people who did not trust her, while the patient held himself, still by sheer will and made almost no sound. It was the hardest single piece of work she had ever done. She had to call for help with the traction pull, because she did not have the strength alone to counter what the muscle around the brake would do. The moment she asked was the moment she thought they might stop her, that asking for something might be read as uncertainty. But 3 fires himself came forward without hesitation and held the leg where she directed, his big hands steady as stone, and pulled when she told him to and held when she told him to hold. The bone moved. It ground and then it released and then it seated, and Adela felt it the way she always felt it, a thing that had been wrong going right, a relief so physical she felt it in her own body. Chaitan's hand drove into the earth beside him, and his breath came out in a sound she would not forget as long as she lived, but he did not move the leg. He held himself still through all of it. He looked at the sky above the cottonwoods through the whole of the worst of it, his jaw set hard, his eyes open, and she thought she had never in her life seen a man fight his own body so hard, with so little quit in him. "Almost," she said in her poor Lakota. He heard her. His eyes came down from the sky and found her face, and there was something in them she did not have time to examine right then, some quality of recognition that she filed away. The fibula below the knee she splinted with the willow lengths she had brought and the clean linen wound tight and secure. The swelling would be a problem for days. She told 3 fires this through a combination of signs and words, the compress, how often to change it, what to watch for that would mean trouble. She gave Chaitan the willow bark tincture in a cup of water that the younger woman brought, and he drank it without being asked twice. She worked until the leg was as right as she could make it tonight, and then she elevated it on folded hides and checked the circulation 1 more time, better now, the foot warming, and sat back and breathed. At some point during the second hour, she had realized the camp had come closer. She had not noticed it happening because she had been focused entirely on the work. But when she sat back at the end and looked up, there were 50 people around her instead of 30, and they were quiet in a way that was no longer the silence of suspicion but something else, the silence of watching a thing done well. 3 firers crouched beside Chaitan and spoke to him for a long time, low and careful. Chaitan answered, his voice rough but present. Adela was repacking her case and understanding perhaps 1 word in 10 of their exchange. Then Chaitan turned his head and looked at her. "You came," he said, in English. She had not known he spoke English. "I came," she said. "Why?" he asked, not accusing, a genuine question. She thought about it honestly, the way she always tried to think about things. "Because the boy came for me," she said, "and because I could help, and it would have been wrong not to." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something in Lakota, and 3 fires, to her great surprise, translated it. "He says you have good hands," said 3 fires. His voice was not warm exactly, but it was not what it had been an hour ago either. She felt something rise in her throat. She did not let it show. She said, "Tell him to hold still for 10 days. The leg needs time." She rode home in the first grey of morning with her case strapped behind her saddle, and her hands still smelling of the compress medicine. The mule picked his way home through the river breaks as though he'd done it 100 times, which he had. She thought about the leg, going over everything she'd done, checking it in her mind the way she always did after a difficult case. She thought she had done it right. She would know more tomorrow. The trouble came from a direction she should have expected but hadn't. A settler named Firth rode to her camp the following afternoon, a man who ran cattle on the south side of Painted Rock and who had viewed her with suspicion since she arrived. He had heard about Chaitan, and his face held the alarm of a frightened man. "You went and doctored the chief's boy," he said, "and if he dies, what do you think happens to every settler inside 20 miles? "He won't die," she said. "The bone is set, the circulation was good, and he is strong. And if you're worried about the safety of settlers here, the best thing any of us can do is what I've been doing for 3 years, be the kind of neighbors who can be trusted. That takes showing up. I showed up last night." He rode away without agreeing, but without arguing further. She went back to her preparations for the morning visit. She came back every morning for 7 days. Each morning she examined the leg, the swelling, the circulation, the temperature of the skin, and each morning found an increment of improvement that she allowed herself to note carefully and did not celebrate prematurely. She had seen legs that looked like they were healing turn bad on the 5th day, and she watched for that as diligently as she watched for improvement. The camp received her differently with each visit. The first morning, 3 fires and wakawi, and a quiet but present wariness, everyone watching but no one speaking to her beyond what the situation required. The second morning, 2 women stopped her before she reached Chaitan's shelter to ask questions about the compress, how it was made, whether the willow bark they had was the right kind. She answered them carefully and correctly. The third morning, a man she did not know walked beside her across the camp and pointed at his own elbow, which had been bent wrong for some months, and looked at her questioningly. She examined the elbow. It was an old injury, healed badly. She could not undo what had calcified, but she told him what movements would help and what would cause further damage, and showed him with her own arm, and he watched and tried it and nodded once. On the 4th morning, 2 children followed her from the camps to Chaitan's shelter, keeping 5 feet back but curious in the open, unashamed way of children who have decided someone is not dangerous. By the 6th morning they were walking beside her. Chaitan watched all of this from where he was propped against the willow branch frame they had built for him, unable to move the leg but present for everything that happened in his vicinity. She sometimes caught him watching her when she was working on something else entirely, explaining the compress to Wakchar, or telling one of the older men which plants she used for the tincture. He had the look of a man doing arithmetic. "You have been here 3 years," he said on the 4th morning, a statement. "Yes," she said, pressing carefully along the thigh to assess the bone's position. "Howell was here before you." "Yes." "You are not Howell," he said. "No," she said, "I am not." He was quiet while she worked. Then, while she was rewrapping the splint, "Why did you stay, when the camp did not welcome you?" She sat back and considered the question honestly. "Because there are children here who get fevers and women who have difficult births and men who break bones," she said. "And because Painted Rock is my home now, whether or not I was born to it." She met his eyes directly. "I wasn't going to leave because I wasn't wanted. I was going to earn the right to be here." Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly, but a kind of recognition. "You have been earning it alone," he said. "Yes," she said. "That is a hard way," he said, and said it the way someone says a thing they know from their own experience. She looked at him. There were lines around his eyes that were not all from the pain of the last 4 days, and she saw in him what she had not the chance to see before, not the chief's son, not the fearsome hunter the settlers sometimes talked about in whispers, but a man who was also in the middle of something hard, who carried his people's future on his back the way she had always carried other people's lives in her hands. The weight of it was the same weight, only the shape was different. "What were you doing the day the horse fell?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, trying to cover too much ground, he said. "There has been pressure from the south. New settlers coming through a corridor we have used for generations. I was trying to see all of it at once. The horse knew I was not paying full attention. Animals know." "What happens now?" she said, "with the south corridor?" He looked at her steadily. "That is not a question most settler healers ask." "I'm not most settler healers," she said. "No," said Chaitan. "You are not." He was quiet for a moment. "The pressure will continue. We will find our way through it as we have always found our way through things. Carefully. Together." He paused. "My father believes that the time for isolation has passed. That the only way forward is to know who can be trusted and to build something with them." "Can I be trusted?" she said. He looked at her with those direct, even eyes. "You came alone in the dark with your medicine bag when I was dying," he said. "I think you can." On the 7th day she found the fever. She had been watching for it, the fever that comes with significant bone injury, the body's protest at the insult to itself. It had held off longer than she expected, which was a good sign, but now it was here, and by the afternoon of that day it was high enough that we came for her at a run, which was the only time Adela had seen that controlled, self-possessed woman run. She rode hard to the camp and found Chaitan burning, his skin dry and hot, the careful composure of the first days broken by the fever's confusion. He did not know her when she first came in. He was talking in Lakota, bits and pieces, and 3 Fires was there and Wakchar and the whole family, and the look on their faces was the look of people trying not to show how frightened they were. Adela went to work without pausing to take stock of the feeling in the room, because there was no time for it. She had managed fevers before, in children and adults, settler and Lakota, both in her barn, in people's cabins, once in an open field with no shelter. She knew what she had and what she needed and what to do with it. She went through it methodically, the cooling cloths, the willow bark tincture doubled in concentration, the particular compress she used for infections that drove upward into the blood. She showed Wakchar how to apply the cloths and at what interval, because she could not be here every hour and Wakchar would not leave her son's side for anything. By midnight the fever had not broken, but it had stopped climbing, which was the first good thing. She sat beside him through the first grey hours, changing the cloths and watching his face. At some point he came back to himself enough to know she was there. His eyes opened and found her in the dimness, and he said her name, Adela, quietly, as if testing whether she was real. "Here," she said. He closed his eyes again. By morning the fever was dropping, not fast, slowly, in the careful, grudging way of a high fever coming down, but dropping. She checked the leg, which the fever had not reached, the bone sitting cleanly in its set position. She breathed. 3 fires brought her food without being asked. He set it beside her and did not speak, but the gesture was its own language. Wakcha, we put her hand on Adela's arm briefly, passing by to change the clothes, just a touch, but Adela felt it all the way through. On the 10th day, Chaitan's fever was gone, and the leg was healing cleanly, and she told him he could begin standing, with help, for short periods. He bore the first standing without complaint or visible expression, which she had come to expect of him. What she had not expected was that when he was upright and she steadied him with her hand on his arm, he covered her hand with his. She looked up at him. He was very tall. She had known that from the first night, but it was different now. "Adela Vickers," he said, her name in his voice with a quality she had not heard before. "Chaitan," she said. He looked at her steadily. "You stayed through the fever night," he said. "I did," she said. "Why?" he asked again, the same question as the first night, but asking something different now. She held his gaze. "Because it would have been wrong not to," she said, "and because by then I wanted to." Something shifted in his face, did not move his hand. 3 fires spoke from the doorway, and Chaitan answered him, and then 3 fires went away, and Chaitan let go of her hand and sat back down because he had to, and she adjusted the splint, and the camp went about its day outside, and the cottonwoods turned their leaves in the late morning light. Wakcha, we came to her that afternoon with a younger woman who spoke more English than Adela had expected, and the young woman translated as Chaitan's mother spoke. "What Wakchad?" we said carefully and with the full weight of a woman who chose her words well. She had watched Adela the first night and seen someone who knew what she was doing, seen someone who was not afraid and not cruel and not careless. Seen someone who had asked for help when she needed it without shame. She had been watching Adela for 3 years, longer than Adela knew, and the watching had not been without respect, even when the welcome was withheld, because respect and welcome were different things, and Adela had earned the first before she was given the second. Adela sat with this being translated and felt something she could not name well. Then she said, "Please tell her I am grateful for the chance to earn it." Wakar Way listened to this. Then she responded, and the young woman translated. She says, "You did not need gratitude. You have paid your way here. This is your home now." She is saying it plainly so you will believe it. Adela looked at her hands for a moment. They were not the hands of a young woman anymore. 12 years of this work had left their marks. The calluses and small scars, and the particular sureness of hands that know what they're doing. Good hands. You have good hands. She walked home that evening in the early dark, and her fire, when she built it up, felt different. Not smaller or larger, but more solid, more settled. In the weeks that followed she came and went freely, and the camp received her that way. The children's fevers, the difficult birth in early October, the old man's joint pain she could not cure but could ease. She did it all and was asked to do it, which was the thing that mattered, not tolerated. Asked. She and Chaitan found their way toward each other in the manner of 2 people who are cautious because caution has served them, and who are honest because they cannot comfortably be otherwise. He was walking without the splint by the end of October, a slight hesitation in his step that she expected would resolve completely in the spring. He asked her to teach him more about bone setting, methodically and with attention. She asked him to teach her more Lakota, and he was a precise and patient teacher who repeated things until she had them right and did not pretend when she got it wrong. He told her about the South Corridor and the negotiations his father was conducting, and she listened and asked questions, and once offered a thought about the water rights language that he took to his father. The settler Firth came back to her camp in October and said, awkwardly, that he had been wrong to worry aloud the way he had. She told him she understood the worry, only not the direction he'd aimed it. They were not friends, exactly, but they became something workable, two people who could be decent to one another across a disagreement, which was most of what the frontier required. One evening in November, Chayton came to her fire when the stars were clear over Painted Rock and sat with her in the way they had fallen into, close and easy, and she gave him coffee, which he had developed a genuine taste for. They sat together in the big quiet of the plains night, the fire small and steady between them. "I have spoken to my father," he said. She looked at him. "He thinks highly of you," he said. "I think highly of him," she said. "He said to tell you directly what is in my mind, rather than letting you figure it out on your own." The corner of his mouth moved, "which he said you probably would anyway." She looked at the fire. "I had some sense of it," she said. "And?" he said. She looked up at him. His face was lit by the fire, open and unhurried, the face of a man who had chosen to be here and was not uncertain about it. "And yes," she said, "I'm saying it plainly so you'll believe it." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something she had not expected. He laughed, low and real, the first time she had heard him laugh freely, and it changed his face entirely. "You sounded like my mother just now," he said. "She's a wise woman," said Adela. "Yes," he said, "she is." He took her hand in the quiet way he had, simply, without ceremony, as though it were a thing that had already been decided by the time he did it. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the cottonwoods the night birds moved. The river ran over its stones in the dark. Adela Vickers, who had come to the edge of the Painted Rock 3 years ago, with a mule and a medicine bag and a grandmother's knowledge and very little else, and who had spent those 3 years being the kind of person who showed up even when she was not welcomed, sat beside the man who had called her home in front of his people and felt the peculiar, unguarded peace of having arrived somewhere after a long time of traveling. It was not what she had planned, but it was what she had earned, and it was true, and she held it the way she held everything she had worked for, steadily, with both hands and without letting go.